All right. I think it is live. Can you guys hear me? If you can just put in the comment if you can actually hear me or see me. Um, all right. Cool. Thanks, Chris and Sipidum. Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot everyone to coming to my webinar. And let me start share my screen now so that you'll see my slides actually. Just 1 second. And that's slide. From my screen, there seems to be a bit of delay, but yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, thanks a lot for coming to my webinar. My name is Linton Ye, and I'm a developer, but I really love design and I'm passionate about solving the problem between design and development, and that's why I've been working on this quite a few courses and also did a lot of thinking and research about design tools. I think that's one slide. Huh? Okay, so this is just acronym that I came up with to lower your expectation of this webinar and also kind of manage my stress. Bear that in mind. Okay. So, like I mentioned, I built a few courses, and this is the one course that I built most recently last year, and it's about some basic concepts of Framework X and the React. With that covered, and let's get started with why do we want to design with real data? It seems like Edward, he has some issues with. Hmm. So it looks like the screen sharing is not working quite well. Let me one more. I can see the same thing. Interesting. Sorry about that. Let me see if I can resolve that real quickly. This didn't happen yet. Oh, actually, sorry about that. I forgot to click this present to everybody. Seems like it's working or not. At least the pictures on my preview is moving. Did I select the wrong screen? Oh yeah, that's a good point. I select the wrong screen, definitely. Let me reselect. This is actually the correct screen. Okay. Yeah, I should be looking for this. Yeah, sorry about that. Uh, yeah, now I should see this this one. Maybe I should go back to this acronym to let you just see it very briefly. And then we're gonna start with this why we want to design with real data. All right, cool. Thanks everybody for your help. Um, why do we want to design with real data? I guess I've done some kind of guessing around like this. We want to bring design closer to final product, and we want to kind of stress testing the design and just capture the corner cases in our UI. And improve the quality of user research. So I would really appreciate if you can share with me, your why in the comment. Just feel free to type anything that you think of. That would be great. And later on, I will put together everybody's thoughts and comments, and I will put a recap after the webinar. And I really like this quote of Zach. He's a designer, and now I think he's an engineer also at Dropbox. So by designing with real names, real photos, and real content, we gain empathy for the people who use our final product. I really love this quote. All right, so that's the topic for today's webinar is all about prototyping with data, right? And obviously, this is a very broad topic, and it includes a whole bunch of other things, and we'll see how much we can cover. But it's going to be, we might want to use the data from local files that probably your developer hands you, a JSON file or something. We probably want to call some server APIs to get the data from those remote servers, and also from user input. And also, like for mobile devices, we want to probably just, the general idea is to make the prototype more realistic, much closer to the final product, right? So that it could include a whole bunch of these kind of data. And in this session, we're gonna, maybe a little bit about user input, but not much, not at all for the sensors and stuff. So we're gonna focus on the first 2 points: local files and APIs. And for the APIs, and there are in general like two kinds of API that's in popular use, and one is REST and one is GraphQL. And we're gonna have a very quick look at those. Each of those topics is gonna be one webinar or even one full course on its own. But for today's session, we're gonna just try to scratch the surface and get some general understanding and impression about how to work with the APIs like this. And one good thing is that most of the things that we are looking at, especially in the JavaScript world, and of course, like FrameX is based on JavaScript, and a lot of the data is like JSON file. So if you have a good command of a JSON format, you know how to work with it, and we'll find it not straightforward for when working with REST or GraphQL interfaces, APIs. So with that out of the way, let's look at some demos, right? And you came here to look at demos. Where's my frameworks? So this one, this is just a simple data table, and its data is coming from there's something cut off, but don't worry about that. It's data coming from a static local JSON file, and it just rendered them in like this kind of table format. And we'll be able to, if you look at the right side of the screen, the properties panel, and we can switch the component for each row, so that, like, for example, we have if we choose this one, and you're gonna see instead of the number ratings, we have this star, and also the general layout is different. We can also switch the data, right? Switch around, see different kind of data. Each, like pizza and French, and they're backed by a separate JSON file. And I'm going to show you how to actually build that. And of course, this is the first one. It is backed by a design component over here. If you drag things around, it'll update accordingly. And of course, you can tweak it however you want. And the second one is backed by a code component, and I'll show you soon later as well. But let's get started. So this is like kind of blank file that I have right now. We'll see how fast they can build this and how much we can fit into this 1 hour session. But let me get started with first of all, we're gonna make that. Actually, let me just copy this instead of um, bore you with actually making this design component. I will just copy over. So this design component, it's called restaurant role, right? And then we're going to make a code component that's going to use this design component and display the data in a table. So over here, go to component. We're going to create a new component, and it's gonna call it restaurant table, right? And then it's gonna open Visual Studio Code. Opens over here. It's kind of slow, so I'll make it bigger. I think it's kind of slow because of the screen share or something. But yeah, anyway, so we have the code here. This is a boilerplate for that code component. And there is actually one small trick that I want to show you is over here, the first icon, if you click that, right now it doesn't show anything. But it's actually better to open the folder. So I click open the folder, and you want to open this one instead of the code directory. So you want to open this container folder, and when you click open, and it's going to list all the files in the current directory, very easily laid out so that you can work with them. So this is the restaurant table, and we'll go back to see how this is useful, right? Now the first thing is that I wanted to show you the different data that we have. This is a pizza one. Um, I think there are like a few pizza shops. Um, if you look closely, if you're not familiar with the JSON format, this is basically this square bracket is for arrays, and it's an array of objects. Like this curly brackets is an object, right? And it's an array of objects. So this is one restaurant, and this is another one, and so on and so forth. We have another data like this French, right? It's same format. So first, let's see how we can use this in our restaurant table code format, code component. Line number 3, we're gonna import it, and let me just use French, and we're gonna import it like star as what is that, rows, right? That means we want to import everything from this JSON file and name it rows. And this rows is going to be an array. You can see here, it's going to include all the restaurants in this JSON file. And you see there's an error here, right? There are actually 2 errors. Cannot find module. This is a kind of important error. Why we have that is because we need to, let me save the file first, actually. Because we need to do kind of special configuration in order to import JSON file into our code component. So it's right here. Open this tsconfig JSON, and we're going to add a config here. I will send you the actual thing that we need to include here, but let me just copy and paste and resolve JSON model true. When I save that, go back, and I think it should go away. If it doesn't go away, we will just, this is a kind of refreshing thing. I think it, I think it's still working, even if maybe let me just close this whole thing and reopen it. That seems to be better. Okay, open the folder. Again, open container. Okay, so that error is gone, and which means that we are ready to use this French.json file as this rows, right? And over here, actually, the second thing is that we want to use this design component, which is called restaurant row. And line number 4, we keep importing it. So import something from this the third line canvas, and the name of it is called rest. We can do control space to get the help. Restaurant row, right? So over here, we have this row, line 34. We have this rows as an array, and then we can call map on it, which is going to convert, take every row inside its array and go through a convert function, and then we're going to get a new array. The details, so it's going to be a row, and for each row, we want to use this design component. Restaurant. For now, we just leave everything empty like that. You'll see. Let me actually drag one component from here. That looks a little bit weird. We will fix that, of course. We actually make it on the left and the canvas on the right. Hopefully that will be easier to see. How do I? Okay. Now, look, we see this kind of dark shadow because we got many rows that stack on top of each other. We got a very dark shadow. That's because we have this div right here, and the layout isn't quite right. One way to fix that is to use a stack, of course, right? The stack is going to be the same stack that we find on this this panel. This is this stack, right? This is a standard stack, and we're going to use a stack right here instead of the div. So yeah, finally we have a lot of rows here. And now, of course, everything is just name rating, name rating. We have not got the data yet. So how do we get the data? Because we have the row here, right? Already. So we have the row here already. And each row, let's look at this file. How do I make it? Yeah, that looks good. So we get. So if you look at the bottom half of the screen, for each element or each row right here, we have this object, and we have name, rating, phone, etc. Right, and then we can actually just do this name row dot name. Let's see quickly if this is working or not. That is working, right? Oh, actually, I kind of cheat, and I should show you this. So when you create a new design component, and this guy is supposed to be like that. That's the default. So these are kind of grayed out, which means we can actually click that, and then we will have a name for this particular field right here. so that we can access from the code component, as well as like we can actually, if we uh, make an instance of that design component, and we'll be able to modify the name right here. Okay. So over here, we want to just click all of them, and we don't actually have to have this checkbox. As long as we have a name for each of these fields here, we will be able to access it from the code component. So the same idea, we can do rating, row dot rating, right? And we got a numbers right here. There's actually a better way. Instead of kind of listing all the stuff in this tag, and try to make it make it load all the data. So the better way is to kind of use that object to spread syntax. Yeah, and it's gonna automatically bring in all the stuff that's inside this one. So we have this name and rating, and we also have price and numbers, phone numbers right here. Of course, the photo is kind of special case because it's inside an array. So we want to specifically do this row photos, the first element in that array, and then we're gonna get errors. We're gonna get photos, not errors. So that's this guy. So it's 20 minutes already. Okay, move on to the next one. We want to use that code component as well, and to make it actually switchable. So I guess this is yeah. Let me actually skip that part. So so that we will have time for the later API stuff. But there's one thing that I want to tell you is that this stack, personally, for its current state, I don't really like it too much actually. So this stack has a lot of restrictions. For now, like it's if it's a design component, it's okay. It seems like it's working. But as soon as we switch it to, for example, another component, which is this restaurant with star, I'll show you what that file looks like. It's a code component, and it's styled with this styled component, but it's like a CSS stuff, right? And it has something like this. And if we use that, replace this restaurant role, and you're gonna see everything is kind of so it's actually better than I tried it initially. Um, but still, like it needs. I think actually they changed something. Maybe when I was trying that, every component, every row stack on top of each other again, like overlap with each other again. And I had to use CSS to actually style it to make it look better. Um, and I will send you the actual end result of that file, which is basically using CSS Grid to style it. To make them okay, so that's using local files. So I wanted to show you again is that we have this JSON file, and it's an array, and if we import it this way into our JavaScript file or a TypeScript file, and we'll be able to use them just as a array. We can do map. We can for each of them, and it's going to be an object because we have object here, and then we can use whatever method that's available for an object to kind of work with it. So that's the local data. Let me quickly check if you have actually some questions. And we'll leave the actually let me just answer the question after the like at the end of the webinar, and to make time for the rest of the content. And then now next one is this prototype with APIs, right? APIs, and first one is REST API, and we're gonna want to make something like this. And this kind of super simple stock chart, and over here you can change the symbol, and it'll react accordingly, when you change it, and it plays an animation. And I didn't write this animation or this chart at all. So everything is actually coming from a component found on the store, which is called I think it's Lion Chart by Jackie Lee. So if I install that and go back over here, we can have a line chart. But instead of directly dragging this chart onto our canvas, we're gonna actually write code component that uses this guy, right? So got a code component stock chart. Here. Still move it to the right, and now we've got a. Let me just drag this guy over here. That's okay. Okay, this is the stock chart, right? And for the stock chart, we're gonna, like as I mentioned, we're gonna use that existing component that Jack Lee has published for us. So we're gonna import it. I think it's called chart. Yeah. So this is let's just go over here, and I think we can call import from the code, and it's called chart. Chart, right? And instead of this empty div, we're gonna use this. You just directly return this chart. Now we don't have anything, and hopefully, yeah, it's got a chart. Okay, cool. Now, next step is to actually import the data, right? So this chart component, it supports a data prop, which is supposed to be an array of, like this. I think that's going to be unable to, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be an array. It's supposed to be something like that. Yeah, so that's the data. So the goal is to get this data instead of getting it from a local file or just hard code it like this, like I did. The goal is to get it from something real, right? So let's look at something real here. So this is a API, public API from IEX group, and it provides a whole bunch of whole bunch of data here. And the one that we want to use is this chart. And I believe I use this 1 month. Okay. So the return value of this API is going to be, again, an array. Yeah, this is a JSON format again, right? And it's going to be an array, and then it's an array of objects with some data fields. And at this point, you probably already know how to actually, map this data with the component that we have. It's pretty much the same story. So we just need to figure out how to get this JSON file from this remote service, right? And I just also wanted to talk a little bit about this. Like if you're trying to integrate an API, or specifically REST API, you're going to see documentation like this, and it's going to for especially this guy. There's a get, which means it's HTTP request is something that you can get from the server, and this is basically the base URL. This is a URL, and then you're gonna get this as a result. And also, you typically have different URLs for different functions or different data that you want. For example, the crypto, cryptocurrencies, and you have this crypto for charts and for a whole lot of other things. And the basic idea is that for different kinds of resources, and you probably need a different URL or different way of accessing the data. But at this point, like I mentioned, we want to use this 1 month. Let's copy the link address here and go back to our code. And let's start write a function here, load data. And it's going to be, first of all, we're going to call it URL. And this is also called, in other docs, or this is also called, endpoint. And it's pretty much the same thing, I guess. And now the idea is that this is for Apple, right? And then we're gonna call a function called fetch. Yeah. And because this is something, let's see how I can explain that. Like in JavaScript, this is something like kind of runs asynchronously. Basically, which means that when this code runs, and you will have to kind of have a way to wait for it to complete to complete, because it takes some time to talk to the server and also get the data back. So in this case, I hope you still, if you're familiar with Framer already, and there's this async stuff. When you're making animations, you can await something to some animation to finish, right? And this one is kind of similar. So you can await this fetch to finish, and then you get something like this as you get a result in return. And of course, we'll see. And you will want to actually convert it to something that you can use. Like I mentioned, you want a JSON file so that you can directly use it in your code. So, sorry, rows, right? So this is a result. And it has a method called JSON, which is going to convert whatever we get from this URL and convert it to a JSON. And again, actually, I want to show this. If you hover it on this JSON method, you're going to see there's after this comma, it's called promise. So this is whenever you see this promise, you know that you can use a wait to wait for it to finish. And like this fetch as well, it actually, after this comma, you see this is a promise. This is a promise of a response. But just focus on this promise. Whenever you see a promise, it's something that's going to happen in the future, and you will have to wait for it. So you're going to use this await. And then we have rules. And now let's for now we just don't directly use it yet. Let's just print it out to see if it's actually the thing that we want, right? And then we have this load data. And of course, we need to call it, right? Where do we want to call it? We're gonna use this one of the life cycle method here, bit mount. Whenever this component is ready, we're gonna call this load data. Right now, let's go to the preview and then right click, inspect element, and we should be able to see the result. And there's some errors. Let's just ignore that. Let's ignore that. And this array is the result of this line number 37, this log. So that's rows. We have 21 result, and each of it is an object. Date, open, high, whatever, so that we can use it. Cool. So that we actually we've already got the data, right? So we got data in the form of an array that seems to be pretty easy to use. Now the question is, how do we actually, put this number of rows into this prop for the chart? That requires something called state. If you're familiar with React. So for now, we have 0 rows. And over here, line 49, we're going to use this as a data. But there's a little bit thing. It's because this component, chart component, expect this data to be a string. So that's a little bit pity. So it's better to directly use the data here. But let's just convert it to whatever this component asks for. Just simplify, and it's going to convert array into a string. Now we got empty here because initially our state is an empty array. And over here, instead of printing it out, we can just set the state. So that rows. And by the way, this is a kind of typical way of writing it. So we're setting rows with this constant, right? But because they are exactly the same, we can actually just have this one part, make it better looking code. Hopefully it's working, or probably not. So if it's not working, there might be something wrong. Yeah. Yeah. So remember that, like, we have this array, and if we convert all the array, like all the objects inside the array, literally like this, we're gonna get something that's, what this chart component expect is just simple numbers, just like the 10, 20, 30, right? And right now we actually give it too much information. Let's just fix that. So over here, for each of the rows, make it number rows. And the number rows is we're going to do map again. Map again. For each row, we want to only get its, like this, for example, open. That's a nice number, so we can work with. So line number 42, we're gonna just use this one instead of the original data, which is everything, and that confuse the component. Now we got this data, right? That's looking pretty well. And the other thing that I want to show you is that actually, if we are using, since we're using this chart component already, and we want to be able to, for example, change the background color of it, or some other properties that this chart component allows us to do. There's a simple way. Of course, we can just add them one by one, but there's a simpler way over here. We can directly get all the chart. Can't type right now. Chart and property controls. That means we're going to copy everything from this chart, from this properties controls, and put it into the properties control of our new code component stock chart. And same thing for this default props as well. Get everything chart default, right? And then we get that. Now, if we, click that, and on the properties panel, you see we can, hopefully it'll work. It does. If it doesn't work, that's because I forgot. There's one error here, but that's probably not the cause. The cause is that we need to pass along all the props, all the other props to this chart component, and we'll be able to customize its look and feel by using, line width. Okay. Those are animation stuff. But yeah, so that's let's change that. I hate this color. Okay. One more thing is that remember that I had another prop on the property panel called symbol. We want to switch between different symbols right here, right? So to do that, let's change this text to be, symbol, and initially maybe it's Apple. Okay. Now we have this symbol, right? And probably we want an enum so that we can control whatever options that we have here, rather than just free typing. So we're gonna get an options, and it's AAPL, and then maybe Tesla and Google. Right, so we can choose from these three, right? And then finally, we're going to want to use it in the API call, right? So if you look at this URL, actually, this is just for this specific API, and for like if you are working with a different API, you want to look at the doc of how to specify different parameters for it. But for this one, it's right inside this URL. So there's use this one, line 44. Instead of a hard-coded Apple sign symbol, we can use this props symbol, right? Need to change this to symbol as well. Okay. Now, let's see if it actually works. It does not work yet, right? That's because when we're changing this symbol, the component did mount does not run. It only run once when the component just finished initialization. So for that to work, we need to add another one called component did update. And there's an important detail. So we want to wrap it with like this previous props symbol. If it's not equal to the props symbol right now, in that case, we will call this load data. Otherwise, we won't call it at all. Otherwise, like if we don't do that, if we don't have this if statement, bad thing is going to happen. But now let's see if it's working. So that works as expected, right? Cool. Like this is a REST API, like I mentioned, for different resources, and we probably need a different URL to get it. And now the other thing, which is pretty popular at this point, like it's GraphQL, right? GraphQL is kind of different compared to REST APIs. Is that you get a single endpoint or URL, and you can specify different things. You can request totally different things if if the server that you're working with allows it. So this guy is a GraphQL API. Actually, let me show you what what I wanted to. Yeah, maybe 10 minutes is probably not enough to finish everything, but we'll see how much we get. It's like this is a select box for all the countries. And if you look at the preview, you can choose from this, you got a list of countries. And this list of countries is coming from a GraphQL API. I didn't type all of those country names here. So it's coming from the GraphQL API. And whenever change, and you can see the details change after that accordingly. Let's see how much we can actually cover that. Yeah. So if you open documentation of GraphQL's, like, and typically you're going to get something like this or something quite looks a little bit different. But the idea is that this is a kind of playground so that you can start entering your queries and to see what kind of data that you can get out of that API. For example, here, so this is a GraphQL query which looks a lot like JSON. It's not exactly the same, but it's a start with this curly brackets, and typically you can do control space to get help, right? So now, like if I do number of countries, and then you get an error because it must have a selection of subfields. So which means probably you can have another set of curly brackets, and then control space. So that looks good, right? Now you can click this run button, and it's gonna go to talk to the server, and the server is gonna return the values according to the query that you've just write, right? So now we will want a list of countries. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a list of countries with its name, and you can, of course, you can ask for other information. And if you put phone, which is the telephone prefix or area code or whatever, so it's for that country, and so on and so forth, right? Uh, yeah, let's write this query quickly, and I probably don't have time to work on the rest of it, but let's work on this one. Okay, 5 minutes. That's quite a bit of a challenge. Okay, create a new code component, which is called pre-select. Now let's just use it. Country select. Where is it? Country select. Okay. Yeah, let's move this out of the way. And the idea is that we want to get the list of countries from a GraphQL API, right? So now over here, we want to use um, a component right here. I mean, a third-party library. Let me just go to the command line and let's add that. Add yarn add, which is called the GraphQL request. So we're adding that library, and then we can use that one to actually query the GraphQL API that we've just seen. And again, the same thing here is that we want to load the data. Load the data. And this load data is going to be an async function. And on the top, import. How come it's loading? Import request graph. So this broke. It's broke. Sometimes we can fix it by just restarting it. You know, the way to fix anything is to restart it. Hopefully we'll get GraphQL request. Okay. Oh yeah, it's coming up. Okay. This request, and over here, we are gonna have URL or endpoint copy from the documentation. So it's basically this guy. Okay. And also, we want to have a query. This query is coming from over here. We can actually test it out and see if it works in this console, and then just copy this query over here, just like that. And remember to use this backticks so that we can use multi-line string. Now, okay, get the result. Wait, request, and the URL and the query. Now let's see what it looks like. Same process, and this console log is super useful. Remember to use that anytime that you need help, and then amount, and then we call load data. So back to FramerX. Look at the preview and right-click Inspect Element, and you can also click this guy as well. But yeah, this is a result that we've just got from that service, right? So we got an object which has a field countries, and it's an array. It's an array, right? Which has a list of countries right here. List of fields right here. So that becomes easy, right? Now it's just an object. It's the return value of this GraphQL API is just JSON, and after being processed by this request function, and it becomes an object, so that we can directly use in our code. And again, it's going to be the same idea. We add a state, and we have a list of countries. Right? And over here, we're gonna set state, and we're gonna have a list of countries be the result. Countries. Let's ignore this error for now. Okay, now for for the list, we want to write a select, right? So for each select, we're going to have an option, and so over here, so for the list of countries, this state coming from the countries, and we can do a map, and for each country, we're gonna um, create an option, HTML option with just put a name here, right? Or label, and value. Save it so that it actually formats it correctly. And for each of the country, we want to show its name. And the value, we want to use a code. So in this query, we don't have this code. We don't have the code for the country yet, so we can simply add it over here. And I'll see if it actually works. See, we have a list of countries right here. Yeah, like I mentioned, I can only scratch the very surface of everything in this 1 hour, and it's probably a lot of information for you as well. But don't worry, like it's just once you understand the principles right here. The thing is that what we were working with is basically JSON, and the JSON is going to be converted by some kind of library. For example, this GraphQL request, and it's going to be converted into a JavaScript object or an array. And once we get the array, we can use the map to get the list of the things, and to return different things according to each of the item inside the array. And like this one, we have select options, and for the other one, we have a table. So we were just repeating the row in the table, right? Quickly back to the slides. I just talk about use code and design components to prototype with data, and with by data I meant local files and APIs. For APIs, like very quickly just showed you how to do it with like REST APIs and GraphQL, and everything is in JSON, which is actually quite easy to work with. Hopefully you will agree with that. But if you find it confusing, don't worry. Just keeps practicing. I think with some practices, and you will get the idea of how to work with it very quickly. And the key is that like once you are used to work with local files, local JSON files, and make sure that you are comfortable with that. And once you are confident enough, you can move on to work with APIs. And like I mentioned, and there are a lot of other things that I haven't mentioned. For example, authorizations. Like typically for some of the APIs, and you probably need to log in, or you need some way to get the access of the data. That is something that I haven't touched, and which is going to be probably important, especially if you are working with maybe some of the internal data or something. Like at that time, probably you want to talk with your developer and see, ask them to suggest how to actually do the authorization to get the access of the API, so that you can get the data to put it into your prototype. And for like otherwise, like if you just want to experiment with this idea, how to see how you can actually make a prototype with data, there are some nice public APIs so that you can explore. And I'm going to send you a link afterwards. A few links, and one is this is a collection of all the a lot of the REST APIs, so that we can try it on. I think I found the stock one over here, or I found it somewhere else. But I will make sure to send you this one as well. And also this is a list of GraphQL APIs that you can try it. But to be honest, like this is not as popular as REST API yet. So I was having quite of a difficult time to find a very nice API so that I can show. So the country one is probably the best in this list. And Yelp is good, but it requires a lot of extra information to get it to work. So that I didn't use this one. Yeah, so I think yeah, it's your turn. Just try whatever that you would like to create, and with practice you will learn a lot of stuff like that I showed. And agree, this it seems to be like, if especially if you're just starting out, it seems to be a lot of stuff to take in. But trust me, if you keep practicing, and it will come to you at some point. So just share me what you create on Twitter, and I will love to check it out. Um, so it's 11 o'clock. Maybe I'll spend the next a few minutes to kind of try to answer a question, starting from the. Okay, so actually, yeah, especially. So, yeah, I'll just start with Chris' question. Can you import start twice? What does this mean? Yeah, so the import star, it means import everything from that file, and you will need to give it a name so that it will be like if we see that like in the in this file, uh, right? So because the root of it is an array, and it's what you get, it's going to be an array. And like if it's not an array, if it's just an object, and you're going to get an object as well. Not sure if that's a good answer of your question. And can you show the code for a design component from Robert? No, not for now. I think design component is created programmatically, so there's some kind of magic behind the scene. um, I'm personally kind of looking forward that that they're gonna have some way to make this design component a lot more flexible. Here's a very good example of what I wanted out of from this one is, for example, this guy, right? Um, so the component right here, and it will be nice if I can include this like this star as a code component, so that it will know how to interpret the number, how to convert the number into this number of stars. So it would be nice if I can have a design component. The rest of it, I can still keep it as a simple string or just image, and I can put a code component inside, and you know, and I will be able to pass the number of stars into this design component. So in that case, that means I didn't have to write this restaurant row with star as a code component at all. I only need to write a code component for this star, and the rest is just a design component so that we can easily manipulate on the canvas. So that's one thing that I'm on my wish list, and see if we're gonna get get anything from the team anytime soon. But I've heard that they're actually working on something to make the design component a lot more flexible. Yeah. So okay. 4 minutes past 11 o'clock. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, making it to this webinar, and I hope you find it useful. Thank you. I will write you a recap afterwards, and I'll see you at next webinar.